It's funny, isn't it? How a simple rumor, a whispered anecdote from the darker corners of the internet can unravel a life. I used to be a skeptic, the kind who'd scoff at ghost stories and debunk urban legends with a flick of my wrist and a Wikipedia link. But that was before. Before the static, before the whispers, before the chill that settled into my bones and never truly left. My name is Alex, and I'm telling you this not because I expect you to believe me. I wouldn't have believed it myself, but because I have to. It clawed its way out of the depths of my memory, the way a drowning man's final breath forces itself up. It started, as these things often do, with boredom. A late Tuesday night, rain drumming against my window, the kind of oppressive silence that makes you yearn for any distraction. I was scrolling through an old, obscure forum I'd stumbled upon years ago, a relic from the early 2000s, full of cryptid sightings and ghostly encounters. Most of it was laughably fake, but one thread always stuck out. It was titled simply, "The Line." The posts were cryptic, fragmented, people claiming to have heard it from a friend of a friend, or seen it scribbled on a bathroom stall. A phone number. A specific, impossible sequence of digits that, if dialed, connected you, not to another living soul, but to the dead. Not just any dead, mind you, but your dead. The thread warned, pleaded, practically screamed not to call. It spoke of consequences, of things that followed you back, of a connection that, once made, could never be severed. Of course, I dismissed it. Teenage angst, edgy role-playing. My rational mind, so confident in its superior logic, scoffed. But a tiny, malicious seed of curiosity had been planted. I found the number buried deep in the thread, typed it out on a notepad file. 777-621-0. Nonsensical. Too many zeros. It had to be fake. Yet, I saved it. Days turned into a week. The number sat there, a silent challenge. I'd glance at it sometimes, a flicker of something unsettling in my gut. My apartment felt quieter than usual. The kind of quiet that feels less like peace and more like absence. One evening, after a particularly draining day at work, the urge became undeniable. My finger hovered over my phone's dial pad. It was an old Nokia, one I kept for emergencies, a relic that suddenly felt perfectly suited for this archaic ritual. The smooth, worn buttons felt cold under my thumb. "Don't be an idiot, Alex," I muttered to myself, but my finger was already punching in the first 7. The distinctive click of the buttons seemed unnaturally loud in the silent room. 777-621. My heart hammered against my ribs. What did I expect? A busy signal? A pre-recorded message? A prank call from some mischievous hacker? I held the phone to my ear, my breath catching. What I heard wasn't a dial tone. It was a low, persistent hum, like the internal drone of some forgotten machinery. And beneath it, a faint crackle, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Then, a click, something deep and resonant, as if a heavy door had been unlatched far, far away. And then, silence. A profound, echoing silence, deeper than any I had ever experienced. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the presence of an absence, a vacuum that pressed in on my eardrums. I could feel the hairs on my arms prickle. My breath hitched in my throat. Just as I was about to hang up, convinced I'd reached some deadline or a faulty connection, it came. A sound like shattered glass, soft at first, then coalescing into something else. A whisper. Not a human whisper, but something thin, metallic, like wind chimes made of bone. It was distorted, fragmented, barely discernible, but it was there. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, resonating not just in my ear, but in the very air around me. "Here, you." The voice, if you could call it that, was layered. Multiple voices, perhaps, or one voice stretched and warped into a horrifying symphony. It wasn't speaking to me, not directly, It sounded like it was struggling to form the sounds, like a mouth filled with gravel trying to speak underwater. A cold dread seeped into my veins. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't static. This was wrong. My hand trembled. My fingers fumbled for the end call button. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, a cacophony of distorted pleas and guttural murmurs. Lost. So lost. Cold. No. You. In that split second, a name formed in my mind. A name I hadn't thought of in years. My grandmother, who passed when I was a child. Her voice, or something that sounded eerily like it, was a part of that swirling auditory mess, distant and sorrowful. It twisted my gut. I slammed the phone down onto my desk as if it were a burning coal. The hum stopped, the whispers vanished, swallowed by the sudden, blessed silence of my apartment. I sat there, hunched over, gasping for breath, my hands shaking uncontrollably. It was nothing, I whispered, over and over again, like a mantra. Just a bad connection, my mind playing tricks. But as I looked around my familiar living room, the shadows seemed deeper, the silence heavier. A chill, not from the rain outside, but from within, settled in my bones. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind against the window, sounded like a whisper. I kept seeing movement in the periphery of my vision, dark shapes that vanished when I turned to look. My skepticism, once an impenetrable shield, had been pierced. The next few days were a blur of growing paranoia. The subtle things started first. My keys, always on the hook by the door, would be on the floor. A book I'd been reading would be open to a random page. Nothing major, just enough to make me question my memory, my sanity. Then came the cold spots. Patches of air, suddenly freezing cold, that would drift through my apartment, lingering for a moment before dissipating. I'd pull my sweater tighter, my teeth chattering, even though the thermostat read a comfortable 70 degrees. The sounds intensified, whispers that weren't coming from the phone anymore, but from the corners of the room, from behind the closed bedroom door. They were faint, like a distant radio tuned to a dead channel, but they were there. I started sleeping with the lights on, a pathetic attempt to ward off the encroaching darkness. I found myself staring into reflections, convinced I saw something behind me. A flicker of movement, a distorted face, only for it to disappear when I turned my head. I went back to the old forum, my fingers trembling as I typed. I found posts from others who had called. Their stories were like mine, starting with skepticism, ending in terror. They spoke of the creeping dread, the paranoia, the feeling of being watched. One user, Ghostwriter88, had detailed the progression. The whispers, the cold, then the vivid waking nightmares. And then, the final stage. The silence. They said no one ever heard from those who reached the final stage. Their accounts just stopped. One particular post chilled me to the marrow. Authored by a user named Veiled Truths, it claimed to have unearthed the true nature of the number. It wasn't about speaking to the dead, the poster claimed. It was about allowing the dead to speak through you. And not just any dead, but the parts of you that would eventually die. Your lost self, your future self, the part of you that decays. And in allowing them to be heard, you blurred the lines. You became one of them. You became permeable. The air in my apartment grew thick, heavy. I could almost taste the decay, a faint metallic tang, like old blood. I felt a constant, unbearable pressure on my chest, as if something invisible was sitting there, pressing the breath from my lungs. My appetite vanished. My eyes were perpetually bloodshot, underscored by bruised circles. Then came the dreams, horrific, hyper-real premonitions. I was floating in darkness, tethered by an invisible cord to something immense and ancient. Whispers swirled around me, forming into fragmented sentences, the voices I'd heard on the phone. But this time, they weren't just generic pleas. They spoke of my life, my regrets, my fears. They knew things. One voice, the one I recognized as my grandmother's, rose above the others. It was no longer sorrowful, but imbued with a chilling desperation. "Alex, run! It found you. It needs you." I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, heart hammering like a trapped bird. The room was dark. The silence was absolute. Too absolute. I realized, with a jolt of terror, that the whispers had stopped. The cold spots were gone. The unsettling movements in my periphery had ceased. The apartment was still. Terribly, utterly still. And that was it. The final stage. The silence Ghost Rider 88 had spoken of. Panic, cold and sharp, lacerated through me. I bolted upright, my eyes darting frantically around the room. I felt clean, empty. The pressure on my chest was gone. The overwhelming sense of dread had lifted. For a moment, a fleeting, blissful moment, I thought it was over, that it had worked itself out, that the connection had broken. Then I heard it. A subtle noise, so slight I almost missed it, like a faint, dry scraping sound, coming from inside my mouth. I touched my tongue with a tentative finger. It felt dry, gritty. My hand trembled as I brought it closer to my face. Black dust, like fine, powdery ash, coating my tongue, clinging to my fingers. And then, I heard the faint, metallic whisper again. Not in the room, not from the phone, not in my mind. It came from my own mouth. "Heard you." It was my voice, but distorted, layered with that same bone chime quality, that ghastly static. It wasn't just my voice anymore. It was all of them. The lost, the cold, the waiting. A chorus of the dead, trapped within my own throat. I looked at my hand, dusted with black. I felt the dry, decaying sensation in my mouth. My own skin felt stretched and brittle. The forum post had mentioned that those who reached the final stage eventually disappeared. They didn't die. They simply faded, became inaccessible, lost. I understood now. The number didn't connect me to the dead. It allowed the dead to connect to me. And in doing so, I became the connection. A conduit. A living phone line for the things that had been waiting in the dark. The things that had whispered through the static. I am not Alex anymore. Not entirely. There's a cacophony of voices in my head, a growing hunger for silence, for warmth, for anything but the crushing, permeating cold. I can feel myself blurring, dissolving. My reflections are growing faint. The world around me feels less real, more like a half-remembered dream. I'm telling you this, stumbling through the words, before I'm gone completely. Before the static consumes me, before I become just another whisper on the line, an echo of a life that should have hung up. If you ever stumble upon that number, if you ever feel that insidious tug of curiosity, remember me. Remember the silence. Remember the dust. Most of all, remember this. There's a number you can call to speak to the dead, but it's not for speaking to them. It's for them to speak through you. And I should have hung up. God, I should have just hung up.